What happens when a seemingly innocent young woman is found brutally murdered in her own home? A case that defies logic, a killer who left no trace, and a mystery that took years to solve. This is the story of Mary Catherine Edwards, a 22-year-old woman whose murder shocked a quiet neighborhood. Was it a random attack, a crime of passion, or something much more sinister? In today's episode, we'll dive into the chilling events leading to her murder, the investigation, and the shocking twist that revealed the identity of the killer years after the crime. The life of Mary Catherine Edwards. Mary Catherine Edwards was a 22-year-old woman living in a small town in Alabama. Known to her friends as Katie, she was the picture of a young woman with a bright future ahead of her. She worked as a receptionist at a local law firm, had a small circle of close friends, and was a devoted daughter to her family. Katie had no known enemies, and her peaceful life seemed unremarkable, yet fate would have a much darker plan. On the morning of March 15, 1997, Mary Catherine's body was discovered in her apartment, the victim of a brutal stabbing. She was found by her mother, who had arrived to check on her after being unable to reach her by phone. The crime scene was horrific, and it was immediately clear that this was not a random act of violence. The crime scene. Mary Catherine Edwards' apartment was located in a quiet, middle-class neighborhood. When her mother, anxiously worried about her daughter's absence, entered the apartment, she was struck by the eerie silence. Katie's body was found in the living room, surrounded by blood. She had been brutally stabbed several times, and there was clear evidence of a struggle. Furniture overturned, blood stains on the floor, and items scattered about the apartment. The police were immediately called, and detectives soon arrived on the scene. The apartment appeared undisturbed in terms of burglary. Valuable items like money, electronics, and jewelry were left untouched. This led investigators to believe that the motive for the attack was not theft, but rather something more personal or targeted. The investigation begins. The initial investigation did not reveal any obvious clues as to the identity of the killer. Detectives interviewed Mary Catherine's friends, family, and co-workers to gather any information about possible suspects. However, as the days passed, no clear leads emerged. One of the first questions investigators asked was whether there had been anyone in Mary Catherine's life who might have had a motive to harm her. She had been dating a man named David Warren at the time, and he became an immediate focus for the police. Friends had described their relationship as relatively normal, though they had broken up shortly before her death. David Warren was questioned, but he had an airtight alibi for the night of the murder. He was ruled out as a suspect, though the detectives noted that his demeanor had been somewhat odd when questioned. Still, there was nothing to suggest he had any involvement, and investigators moved on to other leads. A break in the case. Weeks turned into months, and the investigation began to stall. There were no solid leads, and the case grew colder by the day. But in September of 1997, a break came when a local man named Terry Johnson was arrested for an unrelated assault charge. While in custody, he began to make odd comments that piqued the interest of investigators. Johnson had a criminal history, including a previous conviction for burglary. But what made him stand out to detectives was his confession during a routine interview. While discussing his various crimes, Johnson casually mentioned that he knew about the Edwards murder and had information about it. His statement immediately raised red flags, and police began investigating him more thoroughly. Johnson initially denied any involvement in the murder of Mary Catherine Edwards, but detectives were intrigued by his knowledge of details that had not been released to the public. He knew where she had been stabbed, the location of the body, and details about the crime scene that only the killer would have known. The twist: the unsolved mystery of the connection. As investigators dug deeper into Terry Johnson's background, they discovered that he had a troubling connection to Mary Catherine Edwards, one that had been hidden in plain sight. Johnson had been working at a local hardware store near Mary Catherine's apartment. While there was no evidence that he had been romantically involved with her, several people close to him reported that Johnson had developed an unhealthy obsession with Mary Catherine after she had turned down his advances. Johnson, who had a history of harassing women, had reportedly been seen lurking near her apartment several times before her murder. It now appeared that the attack may have been the result of a twisted obsession. Yet, despite these disturbing revelations, there was still no physical evidence linking Johnson directly to the crime. A shocking confession. The case remained cold for another 3 years, until 2001, when a major breakthrough occurred. Terry Johnson, now in prison for a separate crime, was suddenly willing to talk. While serving his time, Johnson began to express remorse and claimed that he could no longer live with the guilt of what he had done to Mary Catherine. Johnson made a formal confession to the crime, revealing shocking details about how he had stalked and ultimately murdered Mary Catherine Edwards. On the night of her death, Johnson explained, he had been waiting outside her apartment when she returned home. When she entered, he followed her inside, attacked her, and stabbed her multiple times in a fit of rage. He confessed to having fantasized about her for months, and when she had rejected him, he snapped. Despite his confession, the evidence still did not fully support his claims. There were no fingerprints found on the murder weapon and no physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. However, Johnson's confession and the details he provided about the crime were eerily accurate. The final twist: just as the case seemed on the verge of being closed, an unexpected piece of evidence surfaced that would alter the investigation forever. In 2002, a forensic team reviewing the case found DNA traces on a piece of clothing found in Mary Catherine's apartment. The DNA was not a match to Terry Johnson, but rather to another man, someone who had never been considered a suspect. After further investigation, it was discovered that this man, a former co-worker of Mary Catherine's, had a history of violent behavior. He had been in the building around the time of her murder and had even been seen leaving the area the night she died. The new suspect, Gary Cooper, was quickly brought in for questioning. After a tense interrogation, Cooper admitted to being in the area but denied any involvement in the murder. However, DNA evidence found in his car linked him to the crime scene. It was later revealed that Cooper had been in a violent altercation with Mary Catherine weeks before her death, making him a much more likely suspect than Terry Johnson. The killer identified and justice served. Gary Cooper was arrested for the murder of Mary Catherine Edwards and was eventually convicted of her brutal killing. He had been harboring an obsessive hatred for Mary Catherine, fueled by resentment from their prior altercations. Cooper's violent tendencies, paired with his access to the crime scene, made him the likely killer all along. On the stand, Cooper attempted to deny his actions, but the overwhelming evidence against him led to a guilty verdict. In 2003, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The aftermath: Mary Catherine Edwards' family was devastated by the loss, but they found some semblance of closure with the conviction of Gary Cooper. It had been a long, harrowing journey, but justice had finally been served for Katie Edwards. The case had taken years to solve, and for a time, it seemed as though the truth would never be revealed. However, the persistence of investigators, combined with new evidence and a shocking confession, ensured that Mary Catherine's killer would not escape justice. The murder of Mary Catherine Edwards is a tragic story of obsession, violence, and a killer who thought he could get away with it. For years, her family waited for justice, unsure of whether they would ever know the truth. Thanks to modern forensic techniques, perseverance, and a bit of luck, the case was finally solved. It serves as a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind closed doors, even in the most unsuspecting of places.
Thank you for watching this episode from The Lures of the Past. If you enjoyed this journey into mystery and intrigue, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Make sure to turn on the notification bell so you'll be the first to know when our next tale from the past goes live.